So we're back at Anarchapulco, and I'm delighted to be joined by Derrick Broze.
How you doing, brother?
How are you, Derrick?
I'm doing great.
Conscious Resistance, of course. Is it theconsciousresistance.com?
Yep.
You've been doing some amazing work. I've just become aware of you. You went down to Florida for the Jeffrey Epstein trial, and I saw you speaking with Dwayne Madsen.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that, if you could.
Sure. So I've been investigating, I guess, the case of Jeffrey Epstein for the last, pretty much since summer 2018. I started to dig into him, and I ended up making a documentary called Bringing Down Jeffery Epstein that did fairly well online and got some traction, got some people talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And the reason I made the documentary is because I knew that he had a trial coming up. I mean, I'm assuming your audience knows who Jeffrey Epstein is, so he had a case. The billionaire pedophile, I guess, is the easiest way to put it. Yeah. But he had a court case coming up in December of 2018 that I knew about, so I timed my documentary purposely to release it about a month before that, so that it would hopefully, once his name was in the news, people would look into what he's about. And I went to that trial, and it basically it wasn't related to his pedophile charges, it was related to him countersuing the lawyers who were trying to expose him, because he was mad about that, and he, like he typically does, he settled out of court before anything went to court because he was afraid details would be brought out about, the truth of the more than 100 girls that he molested, young girls, teenagers.
Let's be clear, molested or raped?
In some cases, we know for sure raped. In some cases, it was having them over for a massage. As they massaged his back or his chest, he would pull out a vibrator and, play with them or whatever. Sometimes they would comply, typically obviously out of fear. These young girls, this older man's kind of in his home with them in that authoritarian kind of position. And so molested and raped is definitely guilty of. But this case on December 4th was related to his countersuing of the lawyers, and Wade Madsen, among others, were there, reporting on the trial. And so I interviewed the lawyer who's been fighting Jeffrey Epstein for the last decade, representing these women, who many of them are now grown, adults now. And it was one of the kind of darker sides of my journalism that I focus on, but obviously a very necessary, important topic to expose people to.
Absolutely, and it was my first exposure to you, so I've been learning much more about you here at Anarchapulco. You're a fascinating guy. You've been on your own journey. Do you want to share any of that with people?
Sure.
I mean, you've been very open about it.
Yeah, of course.
Overcoming drug abuse and prison.
So that's really where, I guess you could say, my work started. I'm into the realm of investigative journalism, exposing things like Epstein and those sort of topics, and I've written some books and done all these things, but really my journey began with going to prison. I'd spent most of my early years, I'm 34 now, I spent most of my early years visiting my birth father in prison and being very aware of drug abuse, something that's kind of run in the past 3 generations of men on the Broze side of the family that have been in prison, died in prison, abused, drug abuse, addiction, this is just something that's been very prevalent in my family, and alcohol abuse on the other side. So I grew up going to visit my birth father in prison, and as a young child trying to understand what the heck that means. Why do I got to go see him behind razor wire? How come I can only see him for an hour? Why has he got a black eye? How come he says he's going to be home for this thing and then ends up back in prison? It was a cycle of that, and I just integrated a lot of those lessons. I had a lot of negative self-talk and kind of put that weight on my shoulders, and I think I learned to start doubting myself and questioning myself and not loving myself or trusting myself, and also just assuming that everybody in the world was just out to fuck you over, and I was kind of like, I guess that's what I'll do with other people. So it really contributed to a lot of unhealthy behaviors way before I ever got into drug abuse. I mean, I was doing a lot of self-harm. I'd attempted to kill myself 3 times before I turned 18, and spent a lot of my time just really depressed. And by the time I got out of high school, I started partying. I went from just binge drinking all the time, being the guy who was passed out drinking, drinking 20 beer bongs a night or 20 shots and then puking everywhere and passing out, doing that for 6, 7, 8 months, and that went by in a haze, and then taking pills for a period of 6 months. I was just hopping from one thing to the next for about a 6-month period each, and then ecstasy, and then eventually I got hooked on crystal meth, and that was January 2005 when I first tried it, and by November 2005 I was in prison. It was a very quick of having an apartment and job and just living my life, doing things, and then from the day I tried it, within 2 weeks I was just starting to lose weight, lose muscle mass, getting really sick, lost my job. had some drug dealers move in with me, ended up getting evicted, ended up living on the streets, ended up getting taken under the wing of this drug dealer, and just really getting sucked into this whole world where I was just the whole time like, what the heck am I doing? You know, people who I was using with would say things like, you don't even seem like you're happy, or you don't even seem like you're enjoying this, and I would just honestly say, I don't know if I am. I just don't know how to stop. You know, and it took a lot of personal strength and willpower to get myself sober. I was able to get myself sober before I got locked up. I ended up getting locked up for selling, actually, because once I decided I was ready to get out of that and I made that commitment, it was like one day at a time sort of thing, but before you knew it, I was done with crystal meth, and I got away from that. I went back to my family and sort of just asked for another opportunity. I'd kind of destroyed a lot of relationships and burned some bridges in that time, and went back there, but it was one of those kind of stereotypical cases where I was very much struggling financially, and I knew that I could do what I'd been doing for the last year and go sell drugs, and I went and bought some crystal meth, and I planned to be making an arrangement, but in that time period I'd stopped paying attention. Anytime I'd get a ticket, I'd just, oh cool, whatever, and in that point I'd end up with about 10 different warrants out for me, and so one day I got pulled over and I had the drugs in my car, and that was it, and I ended up getting sentenced the first time to 11 months, and then I got out for about 5 months, got sent back for 3 more months, and I was out for a year, and then I did one more 4-month stint. So between 2005 and 2008, I ended up doing 18 months in Texas state prisons, and it was there that I discovered meditation and started to ask myself, how did I get in this position? And to do that self-reflection, to look at that relationship or lack of relationship with my father, and to see that the root of my personal trauma was coming from that, and to start journaling and to start meditating, start asking myself these questions. And that happened way before I started looking into the political system. So that was about 2005, 2008. I got out 2008, about a month before Obama got elected, and then I got out as a felon, so I had that new experience of being judged, and you can't get hired here, and you can't have a house here, and things like that. Started going to the library every day, just applying for jobs, and in that process, as I was getting off the drugs and getting off just away from that craziness, I really felt like this cloud just lifted up off me. Like I said, I'm 34 years old. I feel like I'm about 9 years old, because I think the first 20 to 21 years of my life, I was just buried underneath this like trauma and this pain, this depression. And when that lifted, I remembered, hey, I'm an intelligent person. I like to read. I like to learn. And so while I was at the library, I just started checking out books. I read a book called Cannabis: A History. It was the first book I ever voluntarily took notes on, because I was just so enthralled with it. It was about the history of the drug war, in which I was just coming out for drugs, and it was like, wow, this isn't what I was told in school. What else am I not being told? And that was really, within a week, I read Ron Paul's Revolution Manifesto. I read Jim Marrs' Rule by Secrecy. I think I watched an Alex Jones documentary, and that was it. So I went through the kind of spiritual awakening, kind of emotional side of things before I ever got into the political, and that's why the Conscious Resistance, my message, focuses on both sides, because I see that there are so many people out there like myself, and it's still an ongoing healing process, who are in their trauma and who might want to be here or might want to be involved in these causes, but if they can't get through their own emotional muck, then they have no opportunity to care about the bigger picture and the bigger things. So I try to focus on both elements, waking people up to their own spiritual and personal, emotional self, and healing and empowerment, as well as looking at the physical manifestations of power and exposing those darker things.
Well, you look remarkably healthy.
Thank you, brother.
It's a great recovery story. I mean, I'm sure at the depths of your drug abuse, people would have, someone see you on the street and dismiss you as some homeless guy that has nothing to say and nothing to do. But it's really interesting to get this kind of insight. And again, I knew none of this about you until the other day when you were talking about it on stage. You're doing really remarkable work in independent journalism and exposing Epstein. So here you are. Now, granted, using and selling crystal meth is bad, but it's not as bad as raping hundreds of girls, and Epstein seems to have spent not as much time in jail as you did.
Less time than I did, absolutely.
What do you think of that?
Well, I want to say to what you just said there about crystal meth, and absolutely, crystal meth is a horrible drug. Don't try it. There's no enlightenment to be found there. I used to think that the key to enlightenment was sticking as many drugs in as many orifices as I could find, right? That'll get me to the path. Obviously, I realized that wasn't the truth. But I will say, prison did not save me. That place is a horrible institution that is not designed to rehabilitate people, to help them heal. The prisons are filled with people who commit victimless crimes. Who, even with things like crystal meth, I do believe that that all drugs should be decriminalized and people should have a free choice to decide what they want. It doesn't mean I would endorse it. I don't think crystal meth is healthy, but I know that people like myself who choose to use those things, there's a deeper root trauma, as I was saying with my own thing, and throwing people in a cage where they're in there with people who have committed violent crimes, or just, they throw everybody together. You're not in any sort of specialized area to make sure you get the help you need. They just treat you like every other criminal. That's not, my story is not very typical. I've met people in there, a lot of brilliant people. Some of them are dead. Some of them are still cycling in and out of that system. Others, they got away from their problems and their addictions and their issues. But my point is to say that today, with my philosophical beliefs, I don't think that people should be caged for even things like crystal meth. They should be offered help that they need, like we see in Portugal and other places like that. And the prison system, it has no credit for helping me out. It was a personal decision that I chose to make within the confines of that space. I just want to establish that because, and it is frustrating as somebody who went through that, and now again I see wow, I didn't commit, I didn't hurt anybody in the process. If obviously the drugs hurt people, but people voluntarily came to me. I didn't hold a gun to somebody's head and say, hey, take this crystal meth, I'm gonna put it up in your body or whatever, right? Whereas somebody like Epstein forces himself on people, forcing young girls, using coercion, using all the things that we know and these communities know are wrong, and he uses his power and his influence and his money to get. They originally sentenced him to 18 months. He actually did 13 months, and of those 13 months, he was forced to serve he was allowed to leave for 16 hours a day. So he essentially just had to sleep there at night. And he was in a private wing of the local county jail, so he didn't even go into an actual prison with general population.
Wasn't subjected to the violence.
No, he was totally isolated from as well. And the other thing I found out is, he was allowed to leave for 16 hours a day and go to his private residence in Florida, Key West.
Which is a mansion.
Yeah, it's a mansion. I've been outside there, filming outside there. And then even, he was apparently also still allowed to make trips to his private island, in his work release
jet.
or whatever. Yeah, in his jet. And this is, I think, the biggest smack in the face, is that the Florida taxpayers they had armed guards around his house when he would leave for work release and he's just hanging in there on house arrest. The county sheriffs were basically paid to guard his house while he was being held there, in order to make sure he doesn't, he's already pretty much free, but the taxpayers paid for that. So that's kind of the worst part, is he's allowed to leave for 16 hours a day. He can do whatever the heck he wants. They're going to put him on house arrest, which includes flights to a private island.
Was this in the news? I never heard about
that.
Before.
It's in some of the court documents you can find. And
court documents,
which you don't usually make
your reporting.
Yeah, my reporting, others like that. We do try to bring these details. On my YouTube channel, the Conscious Resistance YouTube channel, I've got my documentary Bringing Down Jeffery Epstein, as well as I think I've got maybe 10 different videos that look at different effects of Jeffrey Epstein, including, is Jeffrey Epstein an agent of Israel or the Mossad or intelligence agency? Did Donald Trump actually ban Jeffrey Epstein from his Mar-a-Lago club? These different claims that have been made. I try to look into them, and as with all my work, I don't want to just be another YouTuber or researcher who's muddying the waters with speculation. If I'm going to talk about something, if I'm going to speculate, I'll make it clear to my audience, okay, this is what I believe based on these pieces of information. But if my name is on an article, an essay, a book, a documentary, it's because I can back up the facts there. And just with the Epstein documentary and all my work, the sources in the transcript are publicly available for anybody to watch and to see and define for themselves.
That's what I really enjoyed about your reporting, and I think a conference just let out, so there's a little more noise here, but I really like that because we hear there is a lot of conclusions you can jump to with regard to Jeffrey Epstein, and by all measures, he seems like a terrible guy.
Yeah.
A lot of things that cause us to believe that he is at least affiliated with Mossad. He's closely tied to Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who's well-known Mossad agent. So what were your conclusions? Is he Mossad?
I think that's what you just mentioned, Ghislaine Maxwell and her father, Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was definitely exposed by various people as being Mossad. What I say in the video that I did, I don't know that, for example, if your dad was a CIA agent, that doesn't automatically implicate you would be a CIA agent, right? It could be a family business, but for me, that's not the strong enough evidence to go on.
Right.
However, Epstein has other connections to Israel, even
Yes.
stronger, I believe, than Robert Maxwell. Namely, Leslie Wexner, who is the founder. I don't know if he's the founder, but he's the CEO and the current owner of Victoria's Secret, and also the Victoria's Secret fashion show, which is apparently another way they recruited these younger girls through the fashion models in the Victoria's Secret fashion show. But Leslie Wexner is apparently one of the people who gave Epstein one of his early kind of loans, business loans. It was his mansion in New York that he sold to Epstein. He just has so many connections to, and Wexner is very connected to the Mossad and to Israel as well. So I kind of feel like that connection is even stronger. You know, the Maxwell thing is important to bring up, but again, like we don't have the kind of missing link that says, oh, Daddy Maxwell passed it down to daughter, and she also, you know what I mean? So I brought up both those points in the video, but I think that the Wexner connection is actually a little bit more evidence to back up, because he has a very, potentially even a romantic relationship with Epstein, based on some accounts. It may have been a romantic relationship, it may have just been some kind of business thing, but he set Epstein up and got him set up with money and just all the things he needed. And so there might have been some connection, as I said, between the Victoria's Secret fashion show and the women, because we know that Epstein was recruiting women from Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. That's where some of the young girls who were hired, like, 15, 16-year-old girls who were getting hired to just do a cashier job or a hostess or something, were getting recruited by Joe Zhang into his sex rings. So we know that kind of fits their MO of how they operate. Yeah, but the Leslie Wexner connection, I think, is probably the strongest connection to Israel or to Mossad as it pertains to Epstein.
There have been a lot of questions raised, of course, about, didn't he teach at the Dalton School in New York? So I've spoken to some people who say that you've got to have a PhD to do that. And he has none of that.
No.
How did he get in there?
I'm not even sure about that. He was also awarded, I'm not sure if it was an honorary degree or just some sort of, I think he has a building named after him at Harvard, and he never went to Harvard. He didn't attend Harvard, but again, he's very connected to some of the Harvard top folks and donated a lot of money to them and things like that. So it's clear that he's connected to all kinds of powerful people. And yeah, like your point out there is the source of his income is still kind of a big mystery of how did, the story is that, oh, he worked for Bear Stearns and he was like a real high profile investor and he got rich and this and that. And like I found in one case that somebody said that they tried to do a business deal with him, tried to bring him a new client, and it was a $500 million deal, and he was like, that's too small. Like, that's like, he only deals with the big fish, which may or may not be true, but there's just no clear record of where this money, like you said, he was a teacher, this place, supposedly like had a degree, who knows, and then all of a sudden he appears with this, like, as this rich investor with all this money. The money came from Leslie Wexner, at least in part. Now, did Leslie Wexner get it funneled from the Mossad or somewhere else? That, remains to be discovered. But yeah, absolutely, there's just so many things about Epstein that don't add up. And at the end of the day, he's so connected, and most of the people connected to him have kind of put a distance between themselves now because of all this getting exposed. But that's what protects him. The women who were involved in these sex rings and his sex slaves basically said that on the island, there was hidden cameras, and there's even some indication that he may have had them wear wires or some sort of recording device. Obviously not a wire because they're getting naked, these guys, but this is kind of in the realm of speculation, right? So let me say this. In his house, when they raided his house, they found a dentist chair that's upstairs, and so there is this molar mic that people know about that intelligence agencies use. So I've seen some people kind of speculate that it's potentially that he was putting microphones or recording devices into these women's mouth before he sent them to the private island for the parties where all these famous people were at. So Epstein likely has recordings, whether video or audio, of all kinds of things, and the girls did report that he would debrief them after they had sex or did whatever with these guys and say, okay, so what is he into? What did he like? What did he talk about? And like he's gathering data on all kinds of powerful people. And I think it's obvious that's what protects him. We don't know exactly what he has or who he has it on, but we know that his little black book had, a who's list of Hollywood
including
people, Trump politicians, academic folk, media. I mean, he's just connected to people, royalty, Prince Andrew, and things like that. And he's definitely connected to some former Israeli prime ministers, and obviously not every person in his black book necessarily is involved in these things. It's not, I don't want to say guilt by association, but there's a difference between saying, I got your phone number in a book and I have 40 numbers of yours and your butlers and your driver, like Donald Trump, he had 30 and 40 different numbers of Donald Trump.
Wow.
He was very connected to him in these different regards. And of course, Trump, like the Clintons, have put their distance between him. But we also know that Trump is actually the one who appointed Alex Acosta to the U.S. Labor Secretary, and he's the former Florida attorney who helped cut Epstein's sweetheart deal. So, I mean, it's
a lot of questionable people in Donald Trump's cabinet. Wilbur Ross, we just had William Barr appointed Attorney General.
A lot of the same people from the Bush administration, from the neocons who've been wreaking havoc for the last 30 years.
Covering Iran-Contra, all this sort of stuff. So one of the major points of, I believe it's been speculation so far. I haven't seen any evidence or testimony, but I've heard George Webb say it. I've heard Wayne Madsen say it. Trump and the 13-year-old girl. Is there evidence to support that?
Katie Johnson was her name.
What's the name?
Katie Johnson. So I tried to find her. I actually found the lawyer who was representing her, but I couldn't get him to really talk about it. She's apparently in hiding. Wayne Madsen told me in the interview that he found her, or not Katie, but he found. So the story is basically that Katie Johnson, like some of these other girls, was recruited through Mar-a-Lago or through some other local place she was actually originally picked up by Epstein, and there was two girls. There was this girl named Maria and then Katie Johnson. And what she says and what both girls say is that they were brought in, for a sex party or whatnot, and it was one of the times Trump was there, and that Trump violently raped Katie Johnson, and she describes it in pretty gruesome detail. And these videos you can find them online. She's got her face blurred, and I think there's even a website called Justice for Katie, something along those lines that you can find. But so she tells her, she says that he violently rapes her, and she comes back after he's done. Epstein debriefs her, and then Epstein abuses her, physically assaults her because he's mad. She was a virgin apparently, and was pissed off that Trump took her virginity or something. So he physically abused her and then raped her as well. So she described being raped by both men within the same day. And there were, I think it's Madsen that said this, that he tracked down he tracked down Johnson, but that nobody's been able to find Maria. And if this story is to believe, that it's believed that Maria has been killed or is hidden somewhere or something. But Katie Johnson basically came forward. And I include this in the Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein documentary, try to give all the full context, because her lawyer, she has several lawyers representing her, and one of the lawyers is kind of a high-profile entertainment lawyer who's known for, maybe some shadier lawsuits and things like that. One of them was actually connected or tried to sell the interview to the Democratic Party or to somebody connected to the Clintons. So people who are critics of this
interview of Katie Johnson.
Yeah, exactly.
I do believe I saw it, and I don't know if I was convinced by it. I mean, in this world of everybody deserves to be believed, how do we know that this isn't somebody who was coerced or just came forward
and
to ruin
that's why,
Trump?
and that's the reason I'm bringing up the fact that they tried to sell the video to the Democratic Party, right? Because for some people, bad enough is a long day. Oh, well, see, this is just a politically motivated thing. Dismiss it. There's nothing else to see. Until she chooses to come forward, if she ever does, then we really don't know, because she was going forward with a lawsuit. She had a press conference planned, and then they abruptly canceled the press conference and dropped the lawsuit. But even she says her life was being threatened. Obviously, anybody can file a lawsuit and anybody can drop it.
And then cancel the press conference and say I was.
So it's very easy to
difficult
sort of arrange the whole thing, right, and to make it appear one way or the other. And again, I think it's important for us to use discernment. But I think that let's imagine that is false, right? Maybe this was the Clintons trying to come after Trump or whatever. The reason I tend to doubt that is because the Clintons are also so connected to Epstein that they're scared to even bring it up. That's why they never used it as fuel when Clinton was running against Trump. Neither one of them brought up Epstein. They could have very easily said, hey, they're connected to this billionaire pedophile.
But it doesn't have to be the Clintons. There are a wide array of enemies of Donald Trump, and certainly someone doing this could do it just to be motivated to be paid to shut up, or perhaps...
Well, but I think that he can't dismiss that the Alex Acosta appointment, right? If Trump is this good guy who's some of his supporters believe is fighting human trafficking, is about to bring down all the human trafficking rings, either that's a huge missight there.
But at the same point, why does he put William Barr in? William Barr is a guy who was pivotal in getting Caspar Weinberger pardoned. He was the cleaner for H.W. Bush. By all measures.
Yeah. I think there's more than enough evidence to say that he's not on the side of truth, freedom, and accountability and justice.
Who is
Trump.
Trump
in my view. Yeah, I think there's plenty of evidence to show that, like through his appointments. I mean, he's been surrounded by Goldman Sachs people and people that, bankers, globalists, neocons, whatever you want to say. And, you know, at the end of the day, though, to me, I've kind of gotten past trying to convince people who support Trump one way or the other, because it ultimately doesn't matter to me if people stay focused on the bigger picture, which is to not fall for the authority worship in general. That to me is one of the biggest problems that exists here, is that people are always looking for a new hero to come save the day, which always ends up in a new master, right? So this time it was people on this side want to be saved from Obama or from Hillary Clinton, right? Anything other than Hillary Clinton. And in a couple of years, or it's already happening now, but in the next year or so, the Democrats are going to present some probably new, young, shiny face, probably a woman, maybe Beto O'Rourke, and say this guy will save you, or this woman will save you from Trump. And you know, whether or not they win in 4 years, like if Trump stays and he's out in 4 years, the Democrats will say, here's the new person. You know, it just goes back and forth. And I honestly don't know how anybody who's watched this show for more than 2 or 3 elections doesn't see it.
I mean, without overthrowing the government, we need a president. And if we've got 2 to choose from, I think Trump was a better choice than Hillary.
I just don't buy the lesser of two evils game. I refuse to play it.
Who could we have had as president?
I don't want any president personally. I think, and this is the world that I think that many people here are fighting for, in the sense of, you know, what we call anarchism, which is really just trying to get everybody to accept that if we can pass through this little keyhole that says respect other people's ability to live freely as they choose, as long as they're not causing harm to you. You know, cause no harm to nobody else. So if I'm not imposing on you, I'm not coercing you, forcing you, I'm not violating your person or property and things like that, then we can agree to disagree, we can have healthy discussion, we can disassociate, but it's wrong for me to come and say, live the way that I want to live, right? And so my view, even the best of president with the best of intentions, at the end of the day, the voting for that person is imposing your will on other people who maybe don't want a president, or who want the opposite president, right? If I believe that in a truly decentralized, truly free world, the people who would choose to live under a president, whether it's Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Obama, whatever it may be, right, George Washington, whoever, should have that freedom to do so. But those of us who choose to not participate in those systems should also not be held under them, because at the end of the day, you know, if I say don't pay taxes, which I've done a fairly well job of resisting and avoiding for the last 8 years, and finding strategies that are effective and encouraging people through that and finding ways to promote that. But at the end of the day, I'm under the threat of force and violence, that if the IRS or some state institution says, we don't like what you're doing, we don't like, you know, that you're not paying our, you know, for our tax form or whatever, they will eventually come send men to arrest me. And if I say, hey, I don't agree with you, this is philosophically wrong, I understand how you can take from me, eventually they're going to violently remove me from my house and take me to prison.
Aren't you concerned about that now? You're saying here you don't pay taxes.
Well, I usually don't. I mean, I've said it before, but as of last year, I had, you could feel free to edit that out if you like, but I've had an IRS agent say, hey, you should start saying that less. Somebody who supports my work, who came to one of my talks.
I agree you should say it less, but obviously if you don't pay taxes, the IRS finds out.
Well, the thing is that there are strategies, simple, and I don't mean any sort of like file this type of paperwork and it's the magic key.
And you're not giving anybody tax advice.
No, exactly. I'm not. People are free to do what they want. Also, obviously, people need to do what is advisable for them in their living situation. We all have different lifestyles. I have no kids. I have no debt. I have no major commitments to anything other than myself and, you know, the people I care about. If I was ever imprisoned for something that I know is immoral and is wrong, like I simply can't fathom or understand or see where there's any third party has anything to do with what I make. For example, if you come here and sit down with me on my blanket, we have a conversation, you decide you want to buy a book or a shirt for me, or you just want to throw a donation or whatever, right? This guy over here has nothing to do with that. Why? But if he came over and said, hey, I'm the local government here, I'm going to take 10% of everything you make off this, I mean, he's a thief. He's
but we want roads, don't we?
Yeah, but there's all sorts of ways to fund projects without force and violence. And even if the projects are funded with force and violence, it's an immoral act. It takes away any sort of moral high ground, right? And that's the thing is so if he came to me and said, hey, well, I want to make sure that the passageways here are paved, or we're going to take 20% out of your check starting every week because we're going to feed the homeless down the street, I might agree, hey, that's a beautiful idea, man, I appreciate that, but I need that money. What if I choose to voluntarily give to the community source, the things I want? If I want to pave the roads or if I want to give to the homeless,
right,
why shouldn't I have the freedom of choice to do that, right? Instead of some other person, some third party who has no ownership over me or my life, but must believe they do, comes and says, hey, we're going to tell you how to live your life. Just because a vote was held somewhere, like that's, I see that as the crux of what is really wrong with society, is that even with the best of intentions, we're still imposing our will on other people. And so what I was getting to earlier is that if people choose to still live under the United States government or however they want to, they should have that freedom. I heard Ron Paul one time say, and I even kind of disagree with this, but he said, hey, if people don't want to be forced to pay the taxes that fund the war machine and fund the surveillance state, then they should be allowed to pay $10,000 to the U.S. government and then be cut free. And then if they want to use any services, of course they would have to pay for everything. They'd have to there would be other ways to pay, right? So it'd be more of like a sales tax. Every time you're purchasing something, you're paying it, right? That's something voluntary. You don't have to buy that if you don't want, right? So those sort of ideas, and obviously this world is not happening tomorrow, right? The changes that I believe in more outside of my journalistic work, more on these sort of philosophical things I talk about, are a generational change that myself and others are trying to lay the foundation for now, and others have before us as well, because we have the information and the knowledge that past generations have accumulated, and we have technology that they've never had before, right? So we are really at a prime time to use the best and learn from the past, and take what we can still use the knowledge we have and the resources and networks that we're all establishing, the beauty of technology, and use that to start. I think long-term generationally from our indigenous communities. I'm an indigenous person from America, and I've been getting more into my roots. I learned from the Choctaw. I'm Seminole personally, but I've been learning from the Choctaw the past couple years. And a big part of our communities is the seventh generation principle, and thinking in terms of the impact of your actions, not only on this moment right now and what you see right here, but the impact on your children and their children, and up to the seventh generations and beyond, obviously, but that generation, the next generation. And when you really incorporate that into your life, and not just kind of as a nice catchphrase or something or a t-shirt to wear, but really start truly looking, again, holistically at all areas of your life and the actions you take and the relationships you have and your interpersonal relationship and where you spend your money and the type of money you use, your type of food and the sort, all those things that are involved in who we are as human beings. And you start considering the seventh generation, it changes the way you live, because you start to think like, is this action I'm about to take, is this really necessary, or is this really good for me in the long run, or for the future of the world? And so I'm thinking in those terms generationally, and I know that if we don't make any steps now and encourage people to take concrete steps, whether that means supporting a new president, we all have different strategies, and I accept that, right? There's a diversity of strategies, and that's really beautiful. But if we don't start taking steps now, whatever it may be, whatever your particular strategies are, to actually change the world, then the next generation is going to inherit even more problems than we've got right now. And this is why it's difficult for me to imagine bringing any children into this world. I feel like there's just so much work to do and so much to build. I have nieces and nephews who I love very deeply, and there's
a sadness when you look at young kids.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, they're 7 and 8 years old, and I see the world they're growing up in, and I'm doing everything I can to, as their uncle that they love and they love spending time with, to plant seeds. The same way I did. I have a younger brother who's 13 years younger than me, so. He's 21 now. He's but I've been priming him since he was younger, just planting seeds to question authority, but never telling him what to think, but just showing him information, showing him things. And now he's growing into a smart, intelligent man who has, he's not like in this community per se, but he questions and he thinks. He doesn't blindly accept things, and that's all I can really hope for. And so that's what I'm working towards, is a long generational change where people could have the freedom that I think most of us desire in a more decentralized fashion, which would allow for some to continue to live under the U.S. government or whatever government they choose, and others to opt out and maybe form their own communities with different types of currencies. I mean, a truly decentralized world where the beautiful diversity we see at an event like this could be the world itself, and obviously it's a grand vision, but that's what I aim for. That's what I work towards.
But presently you live in the U.S. I think you said you live in Texas, right?
I live in Houston, Texas. Yeah.
So, I mean, you are kind of subjected to the laws, obviously.
Well, that's a big part of my philosophy is a strategy, and I don't have too much time to get into it now, but if anyone wants to check out my website, The Conscious Resistance, search the terms agorism and counter-economics. That's what my third book mainly focuses on, and a new book that I'm working on right now. And it's essentially, it's a tool book with strategies for how to break free of the systems that don't align with your values. So whether that means corporate systems or governmental systems, essentially being able to find ways to still live free. So yes, I live in the United States, but as I said, I don't play their tax game. I haven't used a bank in over a decade. I don't use any really governmental systems, and obviously there are compromises we all have to make in different ways, because until this next stage is built, I'm still accepting Federal Reserve notes for some of my work. I would prefer not to, because I understand that if we ever want to end the Federal Reserve or even weaken the government, you don't do it by playing your game and participating with their currency, right? We have to use something alternative.
So are you a big crypto guy?
I do believe in crypto as an alternative among other. I don't necessarily think it's going to be like the key to fixing the entire world that some people might believe, but I'm open to bartering, to silver, to precious metals, to crypto. And what I typically tell people is, I use crypto. I have some silver, but for me, the greatest alternative currency that I believe in is seeds, because seeds and the ability to grow your own food is something that's always going to be valued. And obviously things like tools or tobacco, things that have long-term value, because if the shit hits the fan, I can't eat my crypto or a bar of gold. You know what I mean? And unless you have the tools to melt down metals and know how to use them in other ways, they can just become historically gold has value.
Do you know how to do that?
I don't personally, and that's what I'm saying. It may be a skill I might develop in the future, but there's value in that, obviously. But the average person doesn't. Even if they're holding metals. It's so, say we're in a kind of do or die situation and the grocery stores are out of food, and there's some people who have stockpiled seeds and have food canned in their cellar that they can then trade or barter or offer to their neighbors. Say, hey, don't go to that FEMA camp looking for help, or don't go to loot and riot, try to save yourself. Here's some seeds, here's some tools. That's what I'm talking, again, generationally, being the ones who are proactive and thinking ahead, and not for like a zombie apocalypse or anything like that. But I'm in Houston. We get hurricanes. 2 years ago, my girlfriend and her family's house all got wiped out by the hurricanes. People flooded all of the city. Once we knew the hurricane was coming, within an hour, all the grocery stores are empty, all the gas stations are out, and people are freaking out because they haven't taken any steps to be prepared. We are all alive today, wherever we're living in the world, because our ancestors took steps to prepare for the winter. And my grandma has a farm. She still does this. Every week goes out to her garden, harvests her crop, takes it inside, use her pressure canner, cans some veggies, takes it down to her cellar. You bale hay for the winter so the cows can prepare. Like, even if you're not living on a farm, the idea that we have to prepare and be prepared for the future. I think it's another part of the programming. It's been put in this idea of, doomsday preppers, end of the world, like this negative kind of thing, when it's really just smart, because no matter where you live, whether you deal with blizzards, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, fires, there's a reason to have a little bit of food backed up. Some would say 3-6 months is a smart thing, but just ask yourself that question. If an emergency hits your community today, how many days would you last? If the grocery stores were empty, because it's a very weak point. These are centralized food distribution systems that are dependent on traveling thousands of miles. If inflation continues to rise, gas prices continue to rise, food, it'll trickle down, and the people who haven't taken any steps to take care of themselves are going to be, in a very difficult situation. So a lot of my work also focuses on that, is how can we opt out of the systems? That's the main thing, whether we're talking about economic systems, the state, the food production system, anything that's centralized and is out of the hands of our communities. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to be a farmer, but maybe we can each put in an hour a weekend at a community garden and start to learn a little bit of new tools. Come home with some fresh organic produce and you're like, wow, now I actually know if I ever need to plant these crops, if I ever decide to go, I'm not just going in blind. I've actually got a little bit of skills. So, I try to focus on, again, exposing the darkness, but also really practical steps and solutions for breaking free of these systems.
I reiterate what I said at the top of our conversation. You're a fascinating guy, Derrick.
Thank you,
So
brother.
you've got a movie premiering. Well, you showed it the other day, but playing again tonight here at Anarchapulco. What's the movie? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's called Who Will Find What the Finders Hide? And it's I'm really kind of putting it in the genre of true crime, because it doesn't, I think calling it a conspiracy documentary kind of sells it short. And kind of back to what we were saying earlier, I think there's a lot of people who speculate on certain issues, and some people have sort of become numb to the idea of human trafficking and pedophilia investigations, because there's a million YouTube videos out there claiming that they found evidence of this, and sometimes they're accurate, other times they're just speculating, guessing, they're confirming their own biases is what it comes down to, right?
Jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to create more critical thinkers. I don't want I could easily just put out a YouTube video saying, hey, look, here's the, human trafficking claims, this and that, with very little evidence to back it up. And most people would still gobble it up and eat it up and share it up, because they don't necessarily care if there's evidence. They're just willing to believe it.
Entertainment almost.
Exactly. And I am working against that. I think there's a lot of people, even within the alternative independent media, who do true investigative work a disservice by doing that type of stuff. So the reason I preface that with the movie with that is because I want it to be in that genre of true crime where it's a deep dive of this cult. It's called the Finders, and they were active in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe up into the 90s, potentially even till today, and under a different name maybe. But they are most well known for this incident that happened in 1987. Two of the Finders members were arrested in Tallahassee, Florida with 6 children. There was accusations of pedophilia, of human trafficking, connections to the CIA, potential Satanism. And within 6 days, the story, well, first it made international headlines. It was all over New York Times, Washington Post, everything. And then within 6 days, it's gone, nothing to see here. We made a mistake. It's all a big misunderstanding. It's a media hype. It's a hysteria about this, moral panic kind of thing. And it disappears. That was it. That was the end of the story. 6 years later, 93, it pops up again. The DOJ claims that they're investigating, potential that the CIA had covered it up. They investigated themselves, and surprise, surprise, they said they found nothing to see here. And that's it. It kind of disappears from the story, the history. But it's been kind of whispered about in the conspiracy culture for a number of years. And I heard about it for a couple of years, but when you really look on, say you check out YouTube, other than my documentary and the investigations I've done, you typically find just like a 4 or 5 minute summary that kind of rehashes what's already known.
Yeah.
And it's also not really looking deep into it. So that's all I kind of know, and I was like, wow, this is a crazy thing. One day I decided last summer when I was wrapping up the Epstein work, I decided I think I might want to look into this, and I just I did my initial kind of dive into it, and I just couldn't believe that, for one, it'd taken me so long to look in it because it's one of the clear, most obvious examples of human trafficking, of intelligence agencies, and of a massive cover-up. And this is why I'm saying I want to take it out of the realm of conspiracy, because there's very little to speculate on, say, because there's so much documented fact in this particular case that you don't have to speculate. You just point to the documents and you say, oh, this is what this officer wrote, this is what this person identified. Here's it's very clear and cut. So I started investigating them last summer, and then by about October, I decided this is going to be my next project, and I've been working on it for the last 8 months. I've easily put in 80 to 100 plus hours just on the researching process, and plus my editor, other countless hours. I was able to interview an ex-member of the cult who's actually very integral to the cult. He was the right-hand man of the founder of the cult.
Wow.
That's in the documentary. I interviewed some of the law enforcement agents who were involved with the story. The main agent who said that he saw, all the evidence, which was later covered up, and they claimed that he imagined the whole thing, and he is just known for sticking his nose in other people's jurisdiction, and they basically demoted him, docked his pay, and kind of forced him into an early retirement, it seems.
Typical whistleblower treatment.
Yep. And he's still alive. I was able to contact him and locate him, and I was able to, I will say this, and I honestly just kind of felt like I was being guided to this information, however that sounds, because once I decided I was going to look into this, I consider myself to be a fairly qualified investigator and researcher and able to dig up facts. But
very capable.
The information I was uncovering in this case was I was surprising myself constantly, and it was just as if things were just falling in my lap, and even to the point that I was doing my U.S. speaking tour last year around that time in the fall. And as I was looking at the Finders, I was in Florida, and I just happened to be very near where this ex-member of the Finders lived. When I found the law enforcement agent, he works 30 minutes away from where my co-author lives. Just these close connections that were just kind of, in my view, telling me I was on the right path to keep going. And so, we've been working on this for 8 months now, and we did the world premiere the other night, and people requested a second screening, so we'll be doing it tonight. And it will be available online in the coming weeks or so, but this is kind of the first time we're getting to show it. And I'm excited because, obviously I put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it. It's something I want people to care about, but it's also, people are like, it's 30 years old, what is this? It's kind of obscure. What does it matter, right? But the people involved are still alive.
Yes.
They're still around. They're still pretending to be journalists and things that they're not. Some of the documents, the new documents, literally, I think somebody just hurt their toe. But they literally just released new documents in 2018 related to the case. Not the government.
Really?
Somebody filed an open records request. So like I said, it happened in Tallahassee. We have the U.S. Customs agent report. That's the key piece of evidence, He was the one who was fired. The Metro Police Department got involved up in D.C. because they were arrested in Florida, but they had properties up in Virginia and warehousing. So they had a 600-acre farm that got raided by the Virginia State Police. The Virginia State Police, according to records requests, claims they have no documents. They've never heard of this, supposedly. the Metro Police who went on the warehouse raid,
Washington, D.C. Metro Police.
Their documents were taken by the U.S. State Department. So open records request, they say the Washington Metro Police also claims that they don't have those files, that the State Department has them now for one reason or another. But the one files that we did get were last year, the Tallahassee police reports were released, and those also give a lot of details. It's in those documents that we see that the two doctors with the Tallahassee Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services, something along those lines, are the ones who first examined the kids, and they found clear evidence of sexual abuse. And so in order to believe what the finders claim, that this was just a big misunderstanding and they're just an eccentric group of former hippies raising their kids in a new way, they claim they're the original peaceful parents unschoolers. It's really interesting. But in order to believe that version of events, you have to discount that. You have to believe that this agent imagined everything he saw, which is very detailed. Instructions on purchasing children from China, instructions on impregnating the women, the female members of the group, instruction, just all very detailed information. So you have to imagine that he just made the whole thing up, and these doctors imagined these signs of sexual abuse. If you can put that aside, then yeah, the finders was just a big misunderstanding. All the cops involved are just doing their job, and there is nothing to see here, and the people I interviewed are telling the truth. But again, you have to discount it's not a mountain of evidence, but it's clear, and that's the other aspect, and this is what we get into the second half of the film, I won't ruin it, is the founder of the group, his name is Marion Petty, deeply, deeply, deeply connected to intelligence agencies. He was a former Air Force Master Sergeant who supposedly was a chauffeur for all the top intelligence officials after World War II, and then he says he cut ties to them and decided just to go randomly start a cult, and the connections are surrounding all around him. Up until the time of his death in 2004, he was very close to the intelligence community, and not just him, but his family, his wife, his son, and just all over. So it's a very clear example of intelligence community covering up for this cult, who may have been a CIA operation that went bad, may have been a front company that the CIA was partnering with. At the end of the documentary, I kind of present my conclusion for the audience. But yeah, so it's a really interesting topic, and I actually have on my YouTube channel a 7-part investigation. I was advised to make my investigation public while I was doing it instead of waiting to the end. So I did a 7-part kind of showing, here's what I have, and you can kind of follow along, and then we have the final documentary that comes out of that.
Well, congratulations on that fantastic audience response demanding another screening.
Yeah, I'm excited.
But it brings me to my next question, what you just said. You're touching on some of the most sensitive topics, obviously dangerous criminals. Have you met any resistance?
There's a couple of times that I've come home and I felt like a window was open that I know wasn't open. I don't know if that means anything, or if me and my partner have racked our brains trying to. I don't think we left this open. I don't remember this window being open, and I don't know if that was a sign from somebody to let me know they were there. I backed up all of my work while I was doing it, and I'd sent it to other researchers like James Corbett.
Any threats to you?
Well, not specific threats, but I definitely was discouraged from continuing, and it was in a way of. There was another journalist who reached out to me, and he said that he had also investigated the finders, and that one of the men who was arrested in 1987, his name's Michael Houlihan, he said that he was friends with him, and he'd known him for 20 years, and then one day he just realized, hey, you were in a cult? Holy crap, I never knew about this. Let's sit down and record an interview, and you tell me all about this. And so he's like, hey, I've actually looked into this, man. It was just a big misunderstanding. Here's the audio of the interview. Check it out. And I listened to his interview, and I've listened to it dozens of times, and again, Michael Houlihan cannot answer why this agent said the things he said, and he can't answer why the doctors reported sexual abuse. It's just, they imagined the whole thing. He's not credible, and the journalist who reached out to me who did the interview, I think he has a clear bias. He said it was his friend of 20 years, and he didn't press his friend at all. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when he follows up when he says, no, there's nothing to see here, the customs agent got it wrong, he's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me, Or he's like, it was just a big misunderstanding, They try to say, this is the original fake news, this is them,
And don't you think it's possible that if it is a CIA operation, the CIA has sort of journalists that they can insert to deliver the story they want?
This guy reached out, he seems to be a part of some element of truth community. He sent me his website. He's like, hey, you can look into my work and kind of see what I'm about. I don't know a whole lot about him. I know there was a couple of things that set off my radar that like I don't really know if I can trust this guy. And either way, I listened to the interview and I said thank you, I appreciate it. I'm not sure if I'll use anything you sent me, but thanks for sending it to me. And basically let him know I'm still making this documentary. I don't know if that not a direct threat, but I think it was an attempt to just let me know, hey, there's nothing to see here. Like it's okay. Like don't need to go any further.
Well, Derrick, I gotta say, it's amazing work that you're doing. So where will people be able to see? Give us the name of the film and where they'll be able to see it after the premiere.
So it's called Who Will Find What the Finders Hide. The best place to find that will be on theconsciousresistance.com. And of course on my YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/consciousresistance. And I also use, YouTube is the only kind of mainstream platform I'm on anymore. I don't use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any of those others. I use minds.com, so minds.com/theconsciousresistance network is one other alternative place. I use BitChute, another alternative video platform, but you can mainly the website plugs you into everything.
Right, great. Well, listen, I really appreciate you sitting down with me. I apologize about the noise, but it was tough. I know you're so busy while you're here. Great to meet you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And good luck with the film.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.